In this lesson, we're going to look at IELTS Reading summary completion questions. In summary completion questions, you are given a summary of a part of the reading, and you have to put words from the reading into the gaps. Now, some important points that you should know about. Firstly, the words that you put in the gaps will be exactly the same as they are in the reading, so you won't need to change the word forms. Also, remember, it's only from a part of the reading, so you'll need to locate which part of the reading it is. So if it's very unusual that the summary is going to be of the whole reading, so it's normally just maybe taken from 2 or 3 paragraphs. It's worth noting here that there are some other types of IELTS reading summary completion questions that you can get. In some summary completion exercises, you're actually given the words that you have to put in the gap, and then you have to look at the reading and decide which ones will fit. But this, of course, is an example of IELTS reading summary completion questions where you're not given the words, so you have to identify the words yourself from the reading. And another important point you should remember is you must always read the questions very carefully to make sure you know how many words you can use to put in the gaps. So in this one, you can see the instructions say choose no more than 2 words from the passage for each answer. So that means each answer could be 1 or 2 words. We'll look now at how you can find the answers. Now, you want to do this as quickly as possible, so you need to find the location of the text where the answers will be. To do this, you want to scan the text. It's going to be a long text, so you don't have time to read through the whole thing. So to do this, what you want to look for is keywords. So these are words from the summary that will help you find out where the answers are in the text. The best things to look for are things like names of people, places, dates. They're the things that are easy to find when you scan through the text. So take a look at the summary here, and you can see straight away the first thing we see here is quite an unusual name. So that will be a good thing to scan for in the text. If you look through, there's no other names here of places, but here we have another name of a person. So that will be another good thing to look for when we're scanning the text. So now let's scan the text to find out where the answers are. So here's the reading, helium's future up in the air. So we're looking at the names Sobotka and Richardson. So if you quickly scan through these paragraphs here, I'm looking through these first 2 ones. I can't see the names Sobotka or Richardson anywhere here. So we'll go down to paragraph C here. Again, if you look through, I can't see Sobotka or Richardson anywhere. Let's go down to D. Now, if we quickly scan through D, we can see that we have this person's name here. So it's possible that the summary starts here. But remember, we also had the name Richardson. So if we carry on through, I can't see the name Richardson anywhere. So we don't know if the answer's here. Let's go a bit further just in case. If we look at paragraph E we get to here. So we can see again, we've got the name Sobotka here. Let's keep looking through. Can we see Richardson? Yeah, we also have the name Richardson here. We'll look at paragraph F, which is the last paragraph. There isn't anything there. So this is telling me that it's likely it's going to be in these parts here, because they're quite long paragraphs. It's unlikely it's going to start from here, Sobotka. It's quite a short summary to go from here all the way down to Richardson here. That's a lot to read for one summary. To make this easier to look at, I've now got the summary next to the paragraphs where we think the answers are. So firstly, I'm going to take a gamble, and I think, like I said, Sobotka and Richardson are close together here, so I think this is where the answers are. But we should double check first. If we look, so if we read through the first sentence of the summary, Sobotka argues that big business and users of helium need to help look after helium stocks because something will not be encouraged through buying and selling alone. So let's look at the first sentence here. As Sobotka notes, the government had the good vision to store helium, and the question now is, will the corporations have the vision to capture it when extracting natural gas, and consumers the wisdom to recycle? Now this one talks about big businesses, here it's talking about corporations, so it does look like we're in the right place. So let's try and answer the question. IELTS reading summary completion questions are like any other questions in the IELTS reading, in that you need to be aware of synonyms and paraphrasing. You'll have noticed when we look through to check we're in the right place, we found we had big business here. In here we have corporations. So that is common in IELTS reading. It's not going to be that easy that they're going to give you the same words in the questions as you get in the actual reading. They're often going to use synonyms, so you have to use those to find the answers. Also, what they'll do is paraphrase things as well. Paraphrasing is when you express the meaning of something using different words to the original words. So it's a bit different to a synonym, because a synonym is just one word. So really, when you do these summary completion questions, you're looking for the whole paraphrasing of a section. So for this question here, it's basically going to be paraphrased in the part where you try and find the answer. So it's going to be a paraphrase of that. If you want to have a go at question 36 yourself, then pause the recording now and see if you can find the answer. So just for 36 first of all. So you've scanned to find where the answer is going to be. Now you need to read it more carefully to find out what word is going to go in the gap. So you want to read this carefully again. Sobotka argues that big business and users of helium need to help look after helium stocks because something will not be encouraged through buying and selling alone. So as Sobotka notes, the government had the good vision to store helium, and the question now is, will the corporations have the vision to capture it when extracting natural gas and consumers the wisdom to recycle? Well, this doesn't mention, as far as I can see, buying and selling, so it doesn't look like the answer is there. So let's read a bit further. This takes long-term vision because present market forces are not sufficient to compel prudent practice. So it's more possible it's here. They're talking about market forces, and in here they're talking about buying and selling. Having good vocabulary knowledge is important for reading, so it's important that you make sure you improve your vocabulary, and this can be seen in this IELTS readings summary completion question. because here it's quite difficult. We'd think that the answer's maybe in this bit, but we've got compel, prudent practice, which could be words that you might find difficult. To compel is to feel forced or obliged to do something. Prudent is like being careful, not spending too much. It can be in relation to money. It could be like being, if you're prudent with your money, you're being careful. Here it says not sufficient to compel. Here you can see it says will not be encouraged. So once you know the meaning of these words here, you can see that this is saying more or less the same thing. So those have been paraphrased. So that's why good vocabulary and understanding paraphrasing is always very important. So something will not be encouraged through buying and selling alone. And here it says market forces are not sufficient to compel prudent practice. So could it be market forces that are going in here? Well, market forces will not be encouraged through buying and selling alone. Well, that doesn't make sense, because buying and selling is a paraphrase of the market forces. So it has to be this second part here, prudent practice. So I'm thinking it's prudent practice will not be encouraged through buying and selling alone. So being careful will not be encouraged through buying and selling alone. So you can see basically in this part has paraphrased this part, and it's just been placed the other way round. So they've moved the sentence around. So I'm fairly sure then the answer to this one is prudent practice. So I'm going to put that in here. So what we're going to do now, we're going to move on to question 37. So again, pause the recording if you want to have a go at question 37 yourself before we go through it. Question 37. Richardson believes that the something needs to be withdrawn as the US provides most of the world's helium. You can see the answer to this one is going to be here, because it talks about Richardson, it talks about the US government. So this section here is going to be a paraphrase of the section we have here. We just have to work out which word we need to move into here. Another thing, an extra thing you can do to help you find the answers is to think what kind of word is fitting in the gap. Because you can see this word is followed by a verb and it's preceded by the. So that means you're probably looking for a noun to go in here. So if you look at this section here where the nouns are, well, it's not going to be Robert Richardson, that's mentioned already. It's not going to be the US government because the US is mentioned here. So if we're looking at nouns, we have privatization policy, so that's possibly what goes here. The country needs to be withdrawn. We can't withdraw a country, so it's not likely to be that. Global helium. Well, global helium needs to be withdrawn as the US provides most of the world's helium. Well, world's helium, global helium, they mean the same thing, so it's unlikely to be that. The National Helium Reserve. Again, that doesn't really make sense. The National Helium Reserve needs to be withdrawn as the US provides most of the world's helium. So we can't be sure at the moment, but so far this is a possibility because it's the only noun that looks likely to fit in this gap. If we look a bit more closely here, it says something needs to be withdrawn. So it's something is being taken away or removed. If we read here, the US government must be prevailed upon to repeal its privatization policy, as the country supplies over 80% of global helium, mostly from the National Helium Reserve. Well, it says here, repeal its privatization policy. If you repeal a law, that means you mean the law will not exist anymore. They're going to take away the law. So that is similar to withdrawn here. So it looks like the answer is here. So the US government must be prevailed upon to repeal its privatization policy. So it's a privatization policy that's being repealed. So something needs to be withdrawn. Privatization policy. So it looks like this is the answer. If you want to have a go at question 38 again before we look at it, then you can pause the recording now. So first you need to obviously check again, double check where we think the answer is. He argues that higher costs would mean people have to use the resource many times over. So we want to look at where the reading is talking about higher costs, using resources. So if we go to the next section here, for Richardson, a 20 to 50-fold increase in prices. So an increase in prices, higher costs, would provide incentives to recycle, using the resource many times over. That is connected to the same thing as recycling. Again, it's a paraphrase of that word. So it looks like this is where the answer is. We'll just double check and look a bit further down. A number of steps need to be taken in order to avert a costly predicament in the coming decades. Well, that's not connected to that. So it looks very likely that this is where the answer is then. Again, we can think about what kind of word might fit there first to try and help us. It's likely, well, it looks like it will be a noun again, because here we have, what's going to fit here? Have to use the resource. People have a chance to use a resource, have an opportunity to use a resource. So we're looking for a noun. If we look through here again, well, it can't be Richardson, because we've already said use Richardson here. This is an increase. People have an increase to use the resource. That makes no sense. People have prices to use the resource. It doesn't make sense. People have incentives to use the resource. That makes sense. That's being used as a verb here. But if we change it to a noun, people have the recycling to use. That doesn't make sense either. So again, we can see that this one is looking likely. So if we read through this then a bit more carefully. So for Richardson, a 20 to 50-fold increase in prices would provide incentives to recycle. So as we said, this using resources many times over, that's recycling. He argues higher costs would mean people have to, a 20 to 50-fold increase in prices is that part. So we're only actually left with this part here to fit in here. So people have something to use resources, to use the resource many times over. So they have incentives. So this is the answer to go in here. Okay, now pause the recording again if you want to try and do question 39 yourself. But we know the answer is going to be in these paragraphs because that's where we've got to now. The people should need something to access helium that we still have a number of steps need to be taken in order to avert a costly predicament in the coming decades. Well, that's not connected to this. It says a number of steps. If you look at the steps, firstly, secondly, there's 2 steps. It mentions here this and then furthermore. So it's likely this one is in here and this one is here. So onto this part here. Firstly, all existing supplies of helium ought to be conserved and released only by permit, with medical uses receiving precedence. Precedence means priority over other commercial or recreational demands. Well, this first part here is about how people can get hold of helium. It says all existing supplies of helium ought to be conserved and released only by permit. So that's how we can get hold of them. So getting hold of something is the same as to access something here. So something, what is needed to access helium? Well, here it's saying to release it is by permit. So it looks quite possible that permit might be the word to go in here. But again, we can do another step just to double check this, because we can think again what word might need to go in here. Again, we have a, so it's going to be a noun again, a something to access helium. Again, if we go through what nouns are in here, a helium, people need a helium to access helium. That makes no sense. We have permit, people should need a permit to access helium. That makes sense. Medical uses to access helium that we still have. That doesn't make sense. A commercial to access helium. It doesn't make sense. Recreational demands doesn't make sense. So it's looking like this then. So permit is the correct answer. If you want to have a go at question 40 yourself, then pause the recording now. So question 40, furthermore, a something should ensure that helium is used carefully. Now we know we're down to here, so we'll look at this part first. Secondly, conservation should be obligatory and enforced by a regulatory agency. If something's obligatory, that's something that must be done. So something should ensure that helium is used carefully. What are they saying here that must be done to make sure that helium is used carefully? Well, they're saying conservation should be obligatory. To conserve something is to take care of something, make sure it's protected, which is the same as being used carefully. So you can't say a conservation should ensure that helium is used carefully. Conservation doesn't fit here grammatically, and also it's being discussed here. So the other option is a regulatory agency. Does that fit? Furthermore, a regulatory agency should ensure that helium is used carefully. Well, that does make perfect sense. And also, again, we can double check this by seeing what fits grammatically here, because we know we're looking for a noun again, because we have an article here. So we said a conservation can't fit, so we're only left with a regulatory agency, and that seems to be, this seems to be paraphrasing that perfectly. So the answer is regulatory agency. So there we have all the answers to these IELTS reading summary completion questions. Now we'll go on to look at the specific tips then we've picked up to answer these kind of questions. So now we'll look at some IELTS reading summary completion tips. Firstly, remember the summary will usually relate to no more than 2 or 3 paragraphs from the reading. So to find those paragraphs, the second thing you need to do is identify key words, for example, names, places and dates. You need to do that, otherwise you're going to spend too long looking through the reading and waste time trying to find where they are. Identifying key words lets you identify quickly where they are in the reading. So to do that, thirdly, you scan the reading to find those key words in the text. With IELTS reading summary completion questions, it's very important that you understand the meaning of what you're reading. So you need to read the first relevant section of the summary carefully to understand what it is actually saying. If you don't understand what it's saying, you're not going to be able to find which part actually fits. The next bit, in the reading, look for synonyms or paraphrasing to double check you're in the right place. And remember, what you'll often find is that the part where the answer is just a paraphrase of what you've read in the summary completion. So rather than thinking of it as a summarizing exercise, you can think of it as just a paraphrasing exercise. So you're identifying a part in the text which has been paraphrased from the summary. So the next thing you need to do then is read the text very carefully to see which word you think would make sense in the gap. So that's why you have to understand the meaning of the sentences and why, again, vocabulary is so important. But you can also double check to see if it fits grammatically. So think about, are you looking for a noun or adjective or a verb? Often you can eliminate certain words if they don't actually fit, because remember, you're not changing word forms when you move them into the summary. And finally, you can move on to the next question, which will follow the one you've just answered.